Hello, everyone. Good morning. With this past round of Daf Yomi, I feel has just really like taken off, in part because of the hard work of my Jewish learning and the work of organizations like Hadran, and it's just really wonderful. I was saying to Julie right before you all joined us that it really ties into the original vision of Daf Yomi. So Daf Yomi was founded in Lublin. Like in that, like at the end of the 1800s, and the idea was that you could like get on a boat and go to America, and you'd be holding on the same page of the Talmud that everyone else was, and that every Jew would kind of like have the same, be part of the same conversation. And what I was saying to Julie is that what that means is that even if you're only reading, the daily My Jewish Learning tidbits, or you're only coming to this class, it still means you could meet a Jew in the middle, whatever, hiking in Nepal and say, oh, like, this past week, the daf had this in it, and it was so interesting, and you'd have something beyond the weather to talk about with your fellow Jew, and having that be like the unifying activity of the Jewish people. To me, that's very much like my dream vision of this, is that what the Jewish people have in common with each other is the Torah. And so it feels really exciting to kind of be part of this time where the Talmud is really, really playing such a massively unifying force amongst the Jewish people. And I just feel really excited about it. So with that, we're going to hop in. There's one really, in all of Masachet Yoma, there's this theme of the temple, obviously, because most of it, until we get to the last chapter of Yoma, which will be really much more about repentance and some of the themes that we now associate more with Yom Kippur, but the vast majority of the tractate of Yoma is really about like what happened in the temple on Yom Kippur, and that means that the temple just like looms very, very large, in our learning. One of the Today is Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Today and tomorrow are Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and that means we're starting to look towards the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, and from there 3 weeks until the 9th of Av, and the destruction of the temple, and the times in which we start to really think about the destruction of the temple are getting closer. They're almost upon us. And this past week, there's been a lot of theme around not exactly the destruction of the temple per se, but the loss of some of the temple's items. So we had this amazing discussion about where is the Ark, very like Indiana Jones themed discussion about where is the Ark. That's been since last Thursday. And then we also had a testimony of a person who went to Rome and saw the parochet, saw the curtain that separates off the Holy of Holies, and that the high priest would be sprinkling blood on Yom Kippur as part of his ritual. And so I was hoping we would take a look at some of those texts, and we'll notice that there's like a motif in terms of what kinds of texts they're quoting, and that motif is Eicha. So that's what we're going to look at today together in the next, 24 minutes. So I'm going to share my screen. And Julie, I think, has put this into the chat, so you can follow along either on your own or along with me on the screen share. It's just always, whenever you're learning the Talmud, it's important to know, like, what Mishnah did this kind of springboard off of? So we'll just take 2 seconds, we'll look at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says, Misha nital aron even haytasha miyamot nevi'im rishonim. So after the ark was taken into exile, there was a rock in the Holy of Holies, and it's been there since the days of the early prophets. That rock might be familiar to you from such things as the Dome of the Rock. So meaning I've never been up there, and I've certainly never been inside the Dome of the Rock, never been up to the Temple Mount, never been inside the Dome of the Rock, but just from its name, I'm guessing the rock is still there. Ushtiya Hitani Crete, and the name of that rock is Shtiya, or the foundation rock. And it's Gavoa Mina Aretz Shalosh Etzbaot. It's higher than the ground by 3 finger breadths. And when there was no ark there anymore, then the high priest, like in the second temple, when there was no ark of the covenant anymore, the high priest would perform his rituals in this space with just the rock. And that's what you would put the incense onto. Okay, and then And then and then it goes on from there to describe what he would do with the incense and the blood and all of that stuff. But just that's kind of our starting point, where the Mishnah explains how did this all work in a time where there was no ark. Here's what they would do. It would be on the rock. Okay. And the other piece of introduction I want to give is I want us to look at just a little snippet, 5 verses from the beginning of Eicha, the first chapter of Eicha, just so that when we see it come up, you'll have it in your head. One of the hard things about Talmud study, there's many hard things about Talmud study, is that the Talmud assumes that you know all of Tanakh by heart. And therefore it can just quote like one word here, one word there, and you'll kind of have the whole thing just playing in your head and you'll know it. And obviously as a Jewish educator, I aspire for that to be the case for all Jews anywhere, that we just kind of know the whole Torah by heart. And whenever we hear a word from it, we're like, amazing. And you see that really play out in a lot of Jewish literature from times when people knew Tanakh very, very well. In medieval Spain, they would write both Jewish poems, both liturgical poems, and also secular poems. And anytime you would have 3 words in a row, that would be a citation of a verse called a shkihutz. They would assume that the whole verse is irrelevant, and you're supposed to know the whole verse or the whole chapter or the whole context in your head. And like it'll be, like 3 words from, let's say, like, I don't know, like the story of Rebecca and Isaac, and you're supposed to know that actually that whole context is relevant to what's going on in the poem. So just to say that, like, Tanakh literacy, a very important piece of the Jewish library, and assumed by so much of the Jewish library. And that means that when you start to see things getting quoted a lot, it's always time to open up a Tanakh, because that's how I think that's how you get a real understanding of what these texts are trying to say. So that's my argument for what we're about to see, and that's why we're going to look at Eicha at Lamentations first. Okay. You can hear it in your head from Tisha B'Av, right? Okay. Gone from fair Zion are all that were her glory. So you can start to think, what is all that were her glory? All the bolded parts here are the parts that are going to show up in our sections of the Talmud that we're going to look at. Her leaders were like stags that found no pasture. They could only walk feebly before their pursuer. All the precious things she had in the days of old Jerusalem recalled in her days of woe and sorrow, when her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, when enemies looked on and gloated over her downfall. Jerusalem has greatly sinned, and therefore she has become a mockery. All who admired her despised her, for they have seen her disgrace. And she can only sigh and shrink back. Her uncleanliness clings to her skirts. She gave no thought to her future. She has sunk appallingly, with none to comfort her. See, O Lord, my misery, how the enemy jeers. The foe has laid hands on everything dear to her. She has seen her sanctuary invaded by nations, which you have denied admission into your community. So all of this is to say, when we're talking about the ark no longer being there, then of course we're talking about Eicha. And of course we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. And of course we're talking about not just the destruction of Jerusalem, but also all of the precious things of Jerusalem, all the glory of Jerusalem, and her becoming a mockery. So that's what we'll be looking at in some of these texts. We might speed through some of these first ones a little bit. I might kind of skip some of these proof texts just because they take us a little bit far afield. But here's like the Gemara's kind of opening salvo on this subject. So Gemara quotes the Mishnah, which says, after the ark was buried, Misha Nignaz, and the Gemara says, oh, should it be the ark was buried? Mishnignaz Luktani Ela Mishnital. Why is it when the ark was buried? Isn't it when the ark was taken? And the answer is so if you think it's from when it was taken, that would be Tznan Kimad Amar Galal Bavel. That would be in accordance with the position. That would be taught in accordance with the position of the one who says that the ark wasn't buried. The ark was taken in the Babylonian exile. The ark was taken to Bavel. And we bring a bright as proof to that. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer Aron Galal Bavel. We have a bright in the name of Rabbi Eliezer who says the ark was taken to Bavel. And he brings proof to that from the second book of Chronicles, which describes Nebuchadnezzar's slow destruction, and it includes Im Klei Chandat Beit Hashem, with all the precious vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar took. So, what are the precious vessels of the house of the Lord? That must include the ark, right? Okay, great. Here you have Rishon Bar Yochai disagreeing. Here you have Rishon Bar Yochai agreeing. Rishon Bar Yochai Omer Aron Galal Bavel. He said yes, the Aron was taken to Bavel, and then he brings a proof from Isaiah. Isaiah prophesies to Chizkiyahu the destruction of the temple, and includes Lo Yivater Davar Amar Hashem. So they translate. I would have translated this differently. I think he's making a joke, he's like purposely misreading the verse. So you could read it as nothing, as the way they do. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, or you could read it as nothing shall be left of the sayings of the Lord, and that would be Elu Aseret Dibrot Shemo. So nothing is left of the sayings of the Lord. Those are the 10 Commandments those are the tablets that were inside of the ark. But then we have Rabbi Yehuda saying, no, I disagree. Aron bin Kumonignaz. He has the version of the Mishnah that we had, which is the ark was buried in its place. How do we know that? We have this is actually from when the temple was built by King Solomon. It says the Yusham ad Hayom Hazeh, that the ark was placed there and it's there until this very day. Well, if it's there until this very day, then it's just buried and it's still there now. So I'm going to just summarize this next part, but I have to bring it in because we get to one of our verses from Eicha. So then we have Ula saying, hold on, you just said Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai thinks here, right? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai thinks the ark was taken to Bavel, but I have a story that I inherited of a time when Rabbi Matya ben Harash was in Rome with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and they were talking Torah together, and Rabbi Matya ben Harash said, where do you think the Aron is now? And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said to him, Aron b'mkomo nignaz, that the ark was buried in its place. The ark is buried in Jerusalem. It was stored. And how do we prove that? One of the proofs is So that's I'm saying with a lot of words, it's a little confusing, right? So we have a debate. We have a conflict between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai above, who said the ark was taken to Bavel, and here we have Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai saying no, the ark was actually buried in Jerusalem. But the reason why I'm bringing it is because Rabbi Matya bar Harash, who's discussing with this story with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, brings a teaching from Rabbi Eliezer, who taught that it was taken to Bavel. And what's his proof? Veitzemi batzion kol hadara. Gone from the daughter Zion is all of her splendor. My kol hadara. What is all of her splendor? Kol hadara. It means her chamber, i.e., the ark. So when Rabbi Matya ben Harash is quoting sources in proof of the ark was taken, he quotes from Eicha. So that's just our first touch of this, like Eicha citation. So here we have our debate more or less laid out. It goes into what actually Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai actually thought. We're going to leave that to the side. We have our debate between whether the Aron was buried or the ark was buried or the ark was taken. All right, here's our next story. We have a citation where it's going to be basically about a Mishnah in Shkalim, which you might remember if you learned Shkalim not very long ago, and a story about something that happened in the temple in Second Temple time. Amar of Nachman. So Nachman says it's taught in the Tosefta. Chachamim Omrim that the sages said, Aron belishkat dir ha'itzim hayaganu, that the ark was buried in the chamber of the woodshed. So we learned a little bit about the chamber of the woodshed recently. What happens in there? There's people give gifts of families would give gifts of wood to the temple, and the wood needed to be like cleaned and corded and debugged and all of that, and that would actually be the work of priests who had disabilities or things like that precluded them from participating in other types of temple rituals. So this was like their special job. Okay, so the ark was buried there. Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak, Af ana nani tanina, right? You don't need a Tosefta for that. We have a Mishnah in Shkalim that says, Ma'aseh b'kohen echad shayam dasik. There was a priest who was occupied in certain matters. And he saw a floorboard that was different from all the other floorboards. And he went and he told his friend, he couldn't even finish saying it until his soul left, until he died. And they knew for sure that is where the ark was buried. The Gemara asks, "My Hava Avid, what were they doing there?" Rabbi Chalbo says, he was occupied with his axe. He was banging the floor with his axe. And it's taught in the house of Rabbi Shmuel. Actually, it was two priests. They were both. They both had blemishes. I don't love that language. But anyways, they both couldn't. This was the work that they were doing, and they were matzliim be'etzim. They were sorting wormy wood. The nishmata kardumo shalachamian v'nafal sham, and one of their axes fell down. And fire came out and consumed the priest. Which you might that motif or that's clearly an allusion to the sons of Aaron who got too close or behaved inappropriately in the Mishkan, and similarly like fire came out and consumed them as well. So that's again like it's two priests, right? There's a lot of similarities to that story, whatever. But so you have these priests that kind of get access to something that they're not supposed to have access to, and fire consumes them. So that's also, this is all in this week's stuff, just to be clear. And then we have another story here, and this is going to get us another Eicha reference. So we have a description of the temple from 1 Kings 7. Ktiv kamar ish v'loyot, according to the space of each with loyot. Loyot is a very weird word, and this term is a very weird term. So the Gemara says, what is this term? Amar Rav Shila, keish me'oreh b'levayah shelo. Rav Shila says it's like a man joined and clinging to his wife. So this Rabbi Borna Haberman has a lot of Torah about like the sexuality of the temple and the sexuality of the Holy of Holies in particular. And this is like the core proof text for that. This is the Gemara saying the Holy of Holies looked like a husband and wife clinging to each other. And then Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish, when the non-Jews, when the Gentiles came to destroy the temple and they entered the sanctuary, they saw the cherubs like clinging to one another. So the non-Jews, they took the cherubs, they brought them out into the marketplace, and they said, these Jews whose blessings are blessings and their curses are curses, they would be occupied with such matters, with like sexual items. They immediately debased and destroyed them. This is our quote from Eicha, all who honored her debased her because they have seen her nakedness. So what is her nakedness? It's not just like, oh, Jerusalem. It's literally the cherubs were this like sexual kind of item. And when they were brought out into the marketplace and other people saw them, it was almost like shameful. And the gaze, the Gentile gaze onto the cherubs was like embarrassing. Um, so it's again this theme of invasion, this theme of loss, this theme of some of our most powerful items being either lost or here exposed and then taken or buried, where you can sense their power just by noticing where they are. You sense their power kind of vibrating from beneath the floorboards and potentially lethal. Um, that's that's where it gives you this image almost of like in Kabbalah, there's this image that like there were kalim, right? There were vessels, and in order to create the world, the vessels were destroyed, and that all everywhere there's these like little sparkles, like of those vessels, of those broken vessels. I feel like that's some of the imagery here, almost like there's little pieces of things everywhere, and they've been degraded, they've been hidden, they've been stolen by but they're still kind of like sparkling and powerful wherever they are. And then here's just another short one, but that's again bringing in, it's actually on a slightly different topic, but again, just bringing in from that same set of 5 verses from Eicha. This is now our third quote from it. We have a story between a Sadducee and Rabbi Hanina, who says, Hashda Barit Meinatin. So the Sadducee says to Rabbi Hanina, you're certainly impure, since it says about the Jewish people, in Eicha, Tumata Beshuleha. Her impurity was in her skirts. Rabbi Hanina responds to the Sadducee, come see what it says. God is a God that dwells with us amidst our impurity. Even when we're impure, Shechina Shriya B'neihen. The Shechina is still with us, meaning even when we're impure, even when we don't have access to some of these holy things, even when we're living out this destruction of Eicha, that the Shechina is still with us. The presence of the divine presence is with us, even maybe without some of these items that we so yearn for and so wish to see kind of reunited with all of their holy power and potential. But I think twice now we've seen other like interlocutors. So we saw Reish Lakish was describing what the Gentile invaders said about the cherubs, and here we have the Sadducees saying to Rabbi Hanina. And there's a lot of scholarship about like what these kind of outsiders speaking to rabbis represent. Do they represent some sort of, to give voice to some like rabbinic discomfort, that then they say, oh, like an outsider said this, not me that said it, an outsider said it, and here's how I would respond. But really, like, it kind of makes these questions, it brings the questions to the fore and kind of gives articulation to these questions in a way that you maybe couldn't quite admit I have this question. So it allows you to put it in the mouth of somebody else, but then kind of deal with it in the open. So I think that's a piece of it also, kind of dealing with some of these incredibly difficult questions raised by Eicha, raised by the destruction, raised by the fact that we're learning about all of these temple rituals, and yet like the core parts of the temple aren't there, or the temple itself is not there. And how do we even like make sense of it? How do we even think about it? And I think this answer from Rabbi Hanina, we're distanced, we're impure. Like, what does any of this have to do with us anymore as we're learning Yoma? The answer is Hashochini Tam B'Tuch Tumatan, right? Even though Tumata B'Shuleha, even though her impurity was in her skirts, God is still with us because God dwells with us even in our impurity. I think this little tiny story by Rabbi Hanina, I think is like really helps to make sense of the greater picture here. And just in the last 3 minutes, I'll just touch on what these last 2 sources are. So the last one is just, you have this image of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi bringing a proof text. There's a discussion about how the blood was sprinkled onto the curtain, onto the parochet. And Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Yossi, says, I saw it in Rome. The Romans took it when they sacked Jerusalem. And when I was in Rome, I saw it. And here's what I saw. Which I think is just such a heartbreaking scene of loss and destruction. And not only is it a loss of like the physical item and our connection to that physical item, it's a loss of information too, because if you could see it, you would know exactly what happened and exactly how they did it. And if we don't have it, then we're stuck kind of trying to figure it out from the verses. And the whole thing of Yoma is so funny. Like, don't we, like, people did these rituals. How is it possible that we're looking back at the verse and trying to figure out from the verse what they did? Like, what that symbol, that whole practice just symbolizes like an incredible amount of loss. I feel, and when I read this, this little line by Rabbi Yossi, that's really what it brought up for me. Like, this such sadness of like, I went to Rome and I saw it, and here's what I learned. I just thought that was so poignant. And then I'll just wrap up with this bit from Avot Rabbi Natan. So Avot Rabbi Natan is you can kind of read it as like an extremely early commentary, maybe almost like the Talmud, but not exactly. We don't learn it the way we learn Talmud on Pirkei Avot. So, and it's delicious. It's like just, it doesn't really read like Talmud either, but it's just full of like expansions and stories and things we don't have anywhere else. Midrashim, anyways, whatever. In your free learning time, Avot Rabbi Natan, could not recommend more strongly. But it contains a list of things and where the stuff kind of went. So here we go. So these are things that were made and then hidden. And these are they. Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, the Kelim Shabo, and the items in it. Aron Veshivrei Luchot, so the ark, and also the broken tablets, right? Because Moses comes down, breaks the first set of tablets, goes up, there's a second set of tablets, but the Gemara teaches us that both were actually inside. Luchot Veshivrei Luchot Menachim Aron, that the tablets and the broken tablets were inside the ark. And so here we say that's part of the list of things that were made and then hidden. Sintenet Haman, the flask of the jar of manna, and Moses' staff, Tzolchit Shel Shemen HaMishcha, a flask of anointing oil, Makalo Shel Aaron, Shkedea Uvrachea. That's in this week's Parsha. The staff of Aaron with its almonds and flowers. The Aaron's staff blooms in our Parsha. Big Day Kahuna, the garments of the high priest. All those things were made and they were stored, says Avot Rabbi Natan. Okay. Aval, Machtashet Shel Beit Alkinus, the mortar and pestle of the house of Alkinus, Shulchan, Menorah, Paruch, and Tzitz, and the table, the lamp, the curtain, right? We just saw the curtain in Rome, and the headband of the high priest, Munachim Baromi. Those are still kept in Rome, perhaps in the Vatican archives. I think now we don't really think the Vatican actually has this stuff, by the way. They've made a lot of their like Jewish material available to the public, so hopefully they don't. Anyways, okay, we're at time. That's what I have for you today. Thank you so much for coming to learn with me. And I think this practice of like finding themes and listening to patterns that are going on versus from verses that are all a group that keep getting quoted over the course of a couple of days or within a certain chapter, definitely a theme to pick up on as you go. And when you read this week's Parsha, you can tie it all together when we learn about the flowering staff of Aaron, and think about some of the brokenness that we're missing all of these things, but yet that God still resides among us in all of our impurities. And even though we're missing some of this access, we still have access to the divine nevertheless. All right. Have a good week, everyone. Thank you.